Time doesn't erase murder. It just hides it better. They said the case was closed. They said no one was watching. But someone always is. This is Santana True Crime.
Welcome to Santana True Crime. Tonight, I've got with me Steffen Hou. Steffen is an author, producer, and director. One of his works is Faces of Hate, which is available on Amazon. You can get that now. Steffen, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
So, for those that aren't aware, Faces of Hate follows a white supremacist extremist and a member of the KKK. And it's a unique perspective because you're from Denmark.
Yes, I am. Yes, I am. But I've been working mainly in the US doing true crime topics for roughly 10 years. So to me, it's only natural diving in to US topics.
What drew you to this story in particular, and how did you get in touch with Jason?
More or less by coincidence, I did a book back in 2014 that was about the 10 most important challenges the US society was facing back then. The 10 biggest challenges seen by Americans themselves. And one of them was racism. So I did a lot of research back then, trying to highlight all different angles that would cover the topic of racism. I spoke to people who had been victims of racism. I viewed it from a more intellectual angle, and then naturally also the angle really down to earth, the people who was um, putting others in harm's way of racism. And I searched a lot of people who openly admitted that they would be affiliated with organizations as the Ku Klux Klan, Aryan Brotherhood, etc., etc. And I probably reached out to at least 100 different races in the US. And though they all, online at least, claim to be open and willing to stand by their beliefs, when it came down to reality, they all went into hiding. They were all much less bold in reality than they were when they had nothing to lose, except this guy, Jason Barker out of Michigan. He was at that time the spokesperson for a Klan chapter called IKA, Imperial Klans of America. They were known to be one of the largest Klan groups in America, with chapters, I believe, in almost 20 different states. They were very outspoken. They worked more or less like a militia, and they were affiliated with a lot of violence. And their spokesperson, Jason Barker, was actually one of the only persons who dared to get back to me back then in 2014, willing to explain his racial beliefs and sharing a bit of insight to how these clan members actually lived. And from there, 10 years of um, investigations into his way of living started.
When you were filming this, and like you said, this occurred in Michigan, and this is in a remote part of Michigan. What were those first impressions during the movie? You walk into kind of like his man cave, and you see a flag with a swastika on it, the rebel flag or the Confederate flag, and uh, what were those first impressions?
There were many impressions. It would be difficult to say what was the first. Uh, to sum up what I was struck with back then was how despicable he actually was as a person, but also how he truly believed that what he practiced and preached was fair and right. I was also surprised with the amount of violence and guns and almost like movie scenes that was his real life. There was so much hatred, and definitely those were some of the first impressions that I had. But it was also mixed with the strange fact that this guy that was so hateful, that was so violent, that he was also a loving father. And he had a genuine curiosity about what life was like in Europe. What was my life like with my kids? I have a daughter that is more or less the same age as one of his children. And he was, interested in her upbringing. What did she watch on television? How did she go to school? What did she have in her lunchbox? What kind of music did I listen to? So, besides being extremely violent and hateful, as you also see in the film, and all his affiliates that was around him constantly, they were as well. So it was a very scary environment being in, but at the same time, it also seemed almost like comedy that on the other side, they could be interested in life outside the compounds that they spend most of the time in.
Yeah, and one of the things that struck me about him was that, and this kind of piggybacks on what you were saying, is you've got a guy that's wearing these German shirts, we'll call it, or or Nazi affiliated shirts, and he's trying to portray himself as someone that knows a lot about World War II, and trying to portray himself as someone that knows a lot about guns and warfare, especially when they're doing the trick where they take the I'll think of it in a minute, but the powder that they shoot and just kind of
Demeride.
doing like those party tricks, or taking their pistols and just spraying bullets at targets and whatnot. That's not, if you showed that to someone in law enforcement or in the military, they'd say, you know what, this guy's a joke. Like, he doesn't know what he's doing. And I think that even if you showed that to someone that was really involved in guns or shooting competitions, they would say the same thing, like, this guy's a joke. And certainly what you were pointing out is he doesn't have this worldview, but he likes to portray himself as someone that does, by mentioning things like, well, Mel Gibson said that it wasn't 6 million Jews that were killed, and making those statements like that, trying to make himself appear smarter than he actually is. And those are the things that kind of stood out to me, is that the person who he really is isn't the person that he's portraying out in the public.
No, not 10 years later. And I think that with your background in law enforcement, you see it probably differently than the average viewer would, and the way that they see it themselves. Because you're probably right that the way that they handle guns, their attempts to mix bombs, etc., is kind of foolish to a professional. But at the time when we started filming 10 years ago, there was no doubt that these guys, that was the life that they were living, and probably made them even more dangerous than appears to the eye for a professional, because they definitely wanted to leave a landmark, doing something horrific. And the less knowledge they had about guns, etc., probably also made them more dangerous in the public eye if they actually had any success of carrying out what they dreamt about doing. And you're right, today it's a different thing, but it wasn't a different thing 10 years ago. And I took it seriously, the way that they conducted themselves and what they said, because besides also being part of um, the Aryan Brotherhood, the KKK, etc., many of the people around was also, outlaw bikers that were members of some of these 1% clubs that it only takes a few seconds to review these motorcycle clubs that they were part of to realize that a lot of those guys are not guys that you mess around with. So the cocktail of their beliefs and the way they lived and what they believed in, and not least their understanding of what it is to be a real man, on the wrong day, that becomes a very bad cocktail. And I think that cocktail could have exploded with Jason Barker 10 years ago, which also down the line led to the FBI arresting him on the suspicion of contemplating domestic terror. Because a person like him had already been sentenced and served 4 years in jail for a hate crime committed in 2001, where he brutally assaulted a black state trooper and was convicted and served 4 years for that crime. So, as foolish they may seem to a professional, as real and dangerous were they probably in the wrong time and moment. But true, the man we start out filming and portraying, thank God he turns out to be something completely different 10 years later. And that is also our luck with this film. Because when we started out, we truly believed that we would film a radical with heinous beliefs. And our agreement within the film crew was, let's film and get as much as we can. Because these guys were so crazy and also, kind of funny to a normal person, because what they did, what they said, was many times ludicrous. They hated everything Mexican, but the first thing they did when we filmed was opening Mexican beer. So that was just a stupid example. Another example was when one of them spoke about how he loved everything about Hitler and how, everything coming out of Germany, just like Hitler, was great. And a few seconds later, one of them corrects the other, saying Hitler was actually from Austria. The way that they couldn't pronounce the name of the concentration camps that they had named pigpens after. It was, funny, but at the same time, our job, and in general with these kind of guys, is, as stupid they may seem to us and as funny as they may seem, as important is it not to misunderstand that it's not comic guys. They can, by the end of the day, be the exact opposite. So, to make my extremely long answer a bit shorter than intended, yeah, you're right. He was a different person today, or is, than he started out being.
Yeah, and I'm thankful for that. And I want to point out that being stupid and being dangerous are two different things. And I think the stupid ones are more dangerous a lot of the time because it lacks the planning, or don't want to say the right motivation. But if you look at one of the guys that I thought of when I saw this was Eric Rudolph, who was from Murphy, North Carolina, in the mountains, and he's the one that was responsible for the Olympic bombing back in '96, as well as some abortion clinics in Alabama. And that, or even Timothy McVeigh, who Timothy McVeigh had military training, but was took down the Oklahoma City building. And both those people, I'm sure, especially if you look at Eric Rudolph, where he lives in a poor rural community, and a lot of people would blow him off as someone that, is just like a guy that's not very intelligent from Western North Carolina, which is where I went to school, by the way, not insulting anyone from the area. But I think a lot of people's view of that area is not going to be, okay, this is someone that has the ability to create such a big terrorist act like that. But he did. And that's what kind of reminded me of Jason. Is you've got someone that is burning his trash because he believes that the FBI is going to do a trash pull, which is correct. They absolutely would pull his trash if they put it at if he had to put it at the street. But he's also posting things online when he's a convicted felon of him shooting guns, which is a lot easier to do when you're in law enforcement and you're monitoring these accounts. It's like he didn't think that, okay, I am the person that's ahead of this hate group. The FBI is obviously watching me, but yet he didn't think, oh, maybe I shouldn't be holding guns when you're not allowed to possess a firearm if you're a felon, and put that online, which is something that law enforcement, monitors all the time.
Yeah, but it's a good example, and thank God that they actually did monitor Jason Barker. We were in the process of filming when I was in Miami, and on my way home, back home to Denmark, and I got a call from an FBI agent out of Ann Arbor in Michigan, saying that he had a few questions about Jason Barker that he would like to ask. And we set up a meeting when I was back in Copenhagen. And long story short, they had watched online some videos that Jason had put up of himself shooting guns, and they were already naturally interested in him and his crew in Michigan before that. But it was like their good reason to dig even further into to the livelihood and intentions of Jason. And when they arrested him, they suspected him of contemplating domestic terror. And if they had not seen those videos, if he had not been arrested, there is, not to give away too much of the film, we want people to go and watch it, but let me just put it this way. I think that we should all be thankful that they actually did watch those videos, and that he was stupid enough to upload them, because he does admit in the film that he contemplated domestic terror, and that he had an ambition as carrying out an attack, just like Timothy McVeigh, that would leave a landmark and that would have people know that it was him that conducted it. And then we're back. Clever, stupid, organized as a criminal, or disorganized. Who's the most dangerous? The point is, regardless, if a person has the intention and the craziness of committing an attack, regardless if it's big or small, on society and innocent because of his belief, then it doesn't get any worse than that. And in this case, thank God the stupidity revealed something on YouTube, and law enforcement was able to prevent it in time.
Yeah, and I can't say that enough that, I'm thankful that law enforcement did catch that, because you're right. He probably would have gone and eventually done something, especially when I don't think that people, or a lot of people, understand like the mindset of people like that, where um, committing an act like that almost makes their life more relevant and gives them popularity within their group, and that's the most important thing for them. I had William Noguera on, who spent 42 years in um, San Quentin on death row, and he was talking about the Aryan Brotherhood, which you brought up, and the same mindset of that they would rather be a made member of the Aryan Brotherhood and spend the rest of their life in prison than they would creating a path while they're in prison to actually get out and have a normal life outside of jail, to the point of having guys that had 8 months left on their sentence, and they are given the order or the opportunity to join the Aryan Brotherhood by stabbing and killing someone, and they go and do it, because for them it's I don't think a lot of people can appreciate that it is all about being a member of that gang, in that kind of family, and that's more valuable than their actual freedom. And I think that when we look at people like Jason, it's that same mindset of that the most important thing for him is to be recognized as a part of this group and try to make a name for himself. And I don't really think that he's thinking about the consequences as much, until eventually, like we said, uh, he went to prison again. Can you talk about that transformation and the impact of prison when he did go?
Yes, I can. But to start out with what you just said, you're 100% correct. It is all about a sense of belonging to these people. And I think in order to explain the impact that prison had on Jason, we actually need to go back roughly 15 years before he went to prison. When he was 7 years old, his mom died in his arms. They were walking down a dirt road as they were both hit by a truck. He was 7 years old, the mom was only 25. But she didn't make it out of the ditch that night. A few minutes after being struck by the car, she died in 7-year-old Jason's arms. And the child in the ditch that survived way too quickly turned in to a grown man, because afterwards he felt alone in the world. He didn't have a father, he didn't have a mother, and he was only 7 years old. And he weren't able to deal with the grief and the sadness and the emotions that struck him that day and that would follow him up till his knife now. So it was like a ticking bomb wandering around until he was 16. And what you just explained about the willingness to commit a murder with 8 months left of your prison sentence instead of going out to freedom. It was the same thing with him. Was when he was 16 years old. He met the Klan, and for the first time, he felt a sense of belonging when they took him under his wings. So now he had this sense of belonging that would also carry into his first prison sentence when he was convicted as 21-year-old for the hate crime on the Black State Trooper. The first impact prison had on him back then was that it got him even more violent. It got him even more committed to the cause of the Aryan Brotherhood when they took him now under their wings in prison. And when he was there, he grew very hateful towards especially African Americans. And in prison, the impact was a lot of fighting. And he made a promise to himself that when he got out of prison, he would get even more involved with the racism, with the Klan, with the Aryan Brotherhood, etc., etc. And he did. So the impact of prison wasn't as hoped and intended that it would set him straight. It was the opposite. Until he landed a second prison sentence in 2017, 18, where the transformation happened. Because now he realized that he was back in prison, he was already a felon. His, at that time, ex-wife decided that their 5-year-old daughter was not going to go and visit daddy in prison. And he spent roughly another 4 years there. He realized that he had actually created a life for himself where this 7-year-old kid, instead of dealing with the grief, had become violent and hateful, and now he was really paying the price many years later. And if he decided to continue paying that price, it would mean that he would lose access to his children. So I think that it really dawned on him the consequences that were not negotiable the second time he went to prison. And what could he have done? He could have been one of those that you explained before that would dive then even further into the Aryan Brotherhood, not given a certain thing if they were going to spend the rest of their life in prison. But it was the opposite with Jason. He realized that he had much more to live for on the outside than the inside. And he also realized that he had never dealt with the grief of losing the mom. And because he had never dealt with the grief of losing his mom, he also realized that if, which he believes she is, the mom looking down upon him somewhere in heaven, she would not be proud of the man she saw. And that was a burden and a big shame to Jason that he had actually become this beast instead of becoming Bird, which was the nickname that his grandfather gave him and the mom also called him. So he was a beast and not the bird that the family had longed for. And because of that realization, he decided not to go back with the Aryan Brotherhood in prison. He decided to actually take classes that were beneficial to him because he was an extremely angry man. If there was a problem, his solution would be fist fighting because he normally then won. So instead of using the fist this time, he decided to use the brain it turned out that he had, and he even became friends with a lot of African American in prisons. And the transformation came from the fear of losing, but also from a sense of feeling ashamed. And perhaps it's just a lucky strike that he didn't become one of those guys that chose diving further into crime than what was potentially waiting outside the prison.
Yeah, and I think that when you look at guys that go to prison and you look of how prison, or at least I believe they call them like level 3 and level 4 prisons, where you've got affiliated gang members, on the yard. Everything is broken apart by race. It's not, and that's not because the guys are racist. That is just how it is. Like, you have they call them cars, right? So you've got the black car, the white car, and the Mexican car. And like, all the white people work out together, all the black people work out together, and they're very segregated. And that's just kind of the culture of prison life. And so that was one of the things that was very hopeful with Jason going, is despite going into this area that is, broken apart by race, uh, he was still able to overcome that the second time, at least, and be mindful of what he had on the outside with his daughter, and the opportunities that he would have with her, and what he was going to lose if he did screw up and continue to go down this path. So that was a hopeful part about this. And I think this video points out a lot of things that law enforcement and people in kind of that community and even society can look at, where the importance of having a, a good family life. Losing your mom at such an early age, we see that in, other gangs as well. I worked in Southeast Raleigh, which was predominantly Bloods and Crips gang members, and it was the same story. It was, the kids were raised by grandma, dad was gone, or mom was gone. They didn't have that stability. And you see that same effect on Jason and losing his mom at such an early age. And it's virtually the same thing of these guys are in Bloods and Crips and other, African American gangs, is that, you've got a group that comes in, they take him in, they tell him about how, uh, great it would be for him to join their family. They treat him well, and he wants to do everything he can to gain their respect.
Absolutely, absolutely. Um, I think it's very simple with Jason. He'd been drifting for so many years, and he had come to a point where he also realized if he continued the road that he had set himself upon for so many years, it would end with death, either his own death or that he would be responsible for another person's death, or even more people. And it had probably just been something plain in the back of his mind for many years. That could be the consequence. But it was a consequence going back to prison. And I think that made him start thinking about that there could be many different consequences in life to his beliefs and to his general behavior. But I also think that there's another perspective to it in regards to what you're mentioning about it really doesn't matter if you're Bloods or Crips, if you're Aryan Brotherhood, or just doing wrong in life. We all actually want to do good if we just have the possibility and opportunity of doing so. And that goes for Jason as well. Um, he asked me one day a very banal question, but when you think a bit deeper about it, it's not banal by any means. He asked me, do you actually know how hard it is to get out of bed every morning being hateful? And, you know, what a funny question to ask. But if you think a bit deeper about it, it actually tells something about that as human beings, we can be put, regardless if we're putting us there ourselves or if it's by the means of others, in a situation and an environment where we create a persona to survive, or not having to deal with everyday problems. And Jason did that by becoming hateful, because he realized when he became hateful and violent, the pain he felt inside from his mother's death, and by being all alone from the age of 7, if he portrayed, or not portrayed, if he put that same pain on others by attacking them, by making them the victims, then for a short period of time, it gave him some kind of relief. Then he wouldn't have to deal with his own feeling, his own grief, his own sorrow, because that was definitely for him way harder dealing with than the aggression, than the hatred, until he got so consumed by hatred that the first thing he would do when he was waking up in the morning, opening his eyes, was putting on this facade or this persona that was not something he was naturally born into, but he had to create by the experiences that he had dealt with in life. And I think that goes for a lot of people who, we would, for good reason, see as being outcast to society because they don't give a certain thing about society or the well-being of others. They become criminals, or they become hateful. They are preaching a lot of garbage, harming other people. But if they had the chance, or if they had a different background, upbringing, another opportunity in life, like you and I have had, and thank God most people have, then they would probably have chosen that path instead of leading a life where it's actually difficult, having to be hateful every day.
Yeah, and that's such a good point to bring up, that it's so much easier to not deal with your problems and by putting it on others. And for him, it's I believe that instead of dealing with the loss of his mom and what you're saying, and the impact of just, oh, okay, I'm gonna instead, and I know he's not doing this consciously, but I'm going to pass that pain on to someone else. Or there's parts in the movie where he was talking about, like, oh, things are starting to go downhill in the area because the Mexicans are moving in and things like that. And I feel like when people make those statements, they're more or less making excuses for why they're not successful in life, or why their business isn't successful. Same thing with oh, it's all because of the Jews, making those statements instead of saying, well, maybe I should look at ways to improve my business. But I agree with you that and I think that that's a positive too, that he's able to see that about himself. And I think that's a sign of growth. And I don't know if that's something that he learned while taking classes in jail, to, really be able to sit down and look inside yourself and look internally.
That was definitely something that the classes in prison helped along. But the feeling inside of him was already growing before he went to prison a second time, because it was consuming him. And both you and I, because we've both dealt with criminals for so many years in different aspects. So what people who are not dealing with that or meeting these people in everyday life probably don't know, and doesn't realize is that a lot of these people involved in gang activities, etc., if they were put in a chair in a clinic, they would definitely right away be diagnosed with PTSD, because they live a life where they constantly, either have to be violent, or where they constantly fear, and perhaps, even for decades, have feared being the victim, like they have made so many other people victims. They lead a very stressful life, and some continue leading that life because they don't know how to get out of it. But if you sit down and you speak to even people who are sentenced for uh, brutal murders, etc., it's not funny, getting out of bed in the morning, being them. They may portray themselves as human, but when they look at themselves in the mirror, they feel a lot of, anxiety. They feel a lot of plain and simple bad emotions on the inside. And that went for Jason as well. His transformation probably started long before he realized it himself, by the fact that he didn't feel good about himself.
Yeah, and there's a lot to this movie, and I would again encourage people. It's on Amazon, Faces of Hate. Make sure you go and watch it, because we're just touching on some of the aspects of it. There's many layers to this, and I think that you could rewatch it a couple times and take on a new perspective with it. But towards the end, like we're mentioning before, he goes through this transformation and even says that, he would be open to dating an African American woman, and I believe even having children with her. Have you been able to stay in touch with Jason? Do you know, has he reoffended? Is he going down the, correct path still? What's going on with him?
We still keep in touch. Um, at times we talk on the phone. At times it's just by texting. And Jason is doing very, very well. He is continuing the life that he ended with in the film, where we go and we have removed his Hitler tattoos on his calf. In the movie, you'll see that he actually go and meet African Americans. There's a lot of things going on in the film that shows the transformation. But after we shut off the cameras, where we left him back then is a path that he continued afterwards. And I think that he is now extremely proud of who he has become. He's ashamed of who he was, but just the fact that he now has held the same job for a couple of years, and for the same time, or for the first time in his life, he's paying his bills. He's even paying them on time. Little things to most people, but to him, it is something that truly shows that he has transformed his life. Um, and many people, it's correct, it's available on Amazon Prime, and it's also available on the Roku channel. And it's not to advertise for the film, because there is a point to what I'm saying now. It's also available on YouTube, where I think that almost 3 million people have watched it in 9 months or so. Out of these many people that have watched them, you'll find more than 20,000 comments. Most of the comments are actually positive. There's not a few, there's also, a lot of comments where they say, oh, he's only doing it for the camera. And the reason why I'm mentioning YouTube is because it's the only streaming service where you can actually see how people they react to what they're watching. And to me as a filmmaker, that is extremely interesting. because I've been surprised by some of the reactions, both to Jason and to me, but not least to his honesty. But one of the things that people have doubted is whether, he actually continues that life. But he did, because what he was afraid of losing, and that set the transformation going, losing the children, has actually been fruitful to him. Because today he has reconnected with his children. One of his children even, changed his last name, or his name, as I recall it, because he was given Jason's name. And he thought that his dad and the things that he did and said were so despicable that he didn't want to carry his name. They're back in touch. And Jason continues to prove in real life, with the cameras shut off, that he wasn't portraying, that it wasn't a facade that he put on when we were doing the filming and then leaving it behind afterwards. In the film, you'll see and hear Jason say that if any of his children should turn out to be homosexuals, it would be walking on his family name, it would be going against the will of God, and he would disown right away. He wouldn't want anything to do with them. That is, as a father, I would say that is a pretty harsh thing to say. And I couldn't understand how a father could say that he would have nothing to do with his own children. But he did. But he also stands by his transformation in the film, but also in real life, accepting and being proud about that he actually has a child that's gay. And he openly speaks about that. And he also, going back to the many comments, both Jason and I have had a lot of death threats. I think that some even, hacked his bank account, emptying it out of money, etc., etc. There's been a lot of repercussions for Jason doing this film. But still, he has been so honest about his transformation and his wish to inspire other people that when the film premiered in Hubble, Livingston County, Michigan, where the film is shot and where he still lives, a group of neo-Nazis protested outside the cinema. And there were small clashes between moviegoers and these neo-Nazis. Still, Jason walked in on that very same night, despite these neo-Nazis being outside protesting, naturally seeing him now as their enemy. He walked into that cinema, standing before 200 or 300 people, telling about his change, though there was a possible threat to him as a person when he walked in there. I believe that he did the same thing in another town or city in Michigan a month later. So these are concrete examples to prove his honesty and thereby answering your question, that he is still walking the path of being a good person, doing right for what he did wrong earlier on. So it's in that way a film about hate, racism, violence, brutality that turns into a beautiful love story. And it continues to be a beautiful love story in reality for Jason and his children now.
Yeah, and that's such a positive message to take away from this, is the ability of redemption and and hope, honestly, in people. And I'm glad that Jason is taking his story, and I hope that he continues to preach this to other people, because I do think this is a very inspiring message that he can bring to people. You mentioned that with YouTube, how you had what, 20,000 comments or something. How are people viewing this outside the US, or have you gotten any type of feedback, or is there interest in Europe and other countries in movies like this?
Absolutely, absolutely. I think that the film has been watched in more than 100 countries. Naturally, the main part of the viewers are in the US, but a huge chunk is also in the UK, in Australia, and in Germany, because there is a lot of connection to World War II, to neo-Nazis, etc. So that is affiliated naturally with Germany. But I can see that, to my big surprise, I saw that, I believe, 60,000 people in Sweden, of all places, have watched the film. I can see that there are people, in even Russia watching the film. There are people in African countries watching the film, in more than 100 countries. And the reason why I mention that is because this is not a film necessarily about what is going on in the US. Sure, it is, from the aspect or perspective that the main character is American, and that these are domestic issues in the US. It takes place physically in the US. But what is universal to this story is the redemption, the hope that we can, as human beings, come from one place that is quite bad, but end up going somewhere good. And I think that in Jason's case, it's a question of a violent man becoming peaceful, about a racist becoming accepting of other races. It is also a film about a bad father becoming a loving father. So, with that in mind, people can watch it and put it in to their own context of saying, I may be in a place in life where I actually do not wish to be. And if a man like Jason can change, I can change as well. And then it doesn't need to be about racism, hate, or violence. It can actually be that, for some reason, you end a place in life where there may be a bit too much wine, whiskey, whatever in the glass every night. And when the glass is empty, you realize that you're actually leading a pretty sad life, but you can't find your way out of it. So you fill that glass up again, but with the inspiration of Jason, on a things that many people go through. There is a way out of even the deepest hole, and therefore the film becomes, about hope and inspiration for other people.
Yeah, and I'll say it again. Make sure to pick it up. Amazon, YouTube, Roku. I think that you've got some other books that hopefully you'll come on the show and talk about. Do you want to tell us about any other projects that you're working on, or anything else you want to plug?
Yeah, yeah. Before I do, because you're mentioning now another book, and I listened to one of your podcasts with one of these FBI profilers.
Oh,
Uh,
Julia Cali.
Yeah, she was the lead on The Golden State.
Yes.
And I wrote a book called Moms of the Missing. And one of the persons that I interview in there, and one of the cases that I highlight, is actually a case from the early 70s that led to the FBI starting to profile um, the perpetrators, serial killers in particular. And it was a lady called Marietta Yeager. She had her 7-year-old daughter taken and killed by a serial killer in Montana. And based on that case, that was the first case where they profiled the perpetrator and ended up catching him, thank God. But Marietta said to me once, when I asked her, how do you continue in life when you're having your 7-year-old daughter taken and you lose her to by the hands or to the hands of a serial killer? And she said, though you lose a child, you can still afterwards have a good life. It's just going to be a different life. And I think that also plays very nicely into the context of what Face of Hate is about. That it is so important for everyone to remember that no matter what happens in life, like it did to Jason, you still decide yourself what kind of life you want to have afterwards. And though it's a different life, it can still become a good life. And that was just my connection to, telling about the book Mums of the Missing. A current project that we are working on and actually in the stage of cutting right now is another story that is in the book that we decided afterwards to turn into a documentary movie. And we've been filming it for many years. Uh, a lot of people have probably watched the phenomenal Hollywood blockbuster, Three Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri. Frances McDormand won an Academy Award for Best Leading Female Actor from that film when it came out. It's about a mom who is searching for her daughter. She doesn't feel she's getting the right help from law enforcement, so she takes matter into her own hands and puts up billboards. That is like the overall of the film, and it's a great film. But we've, for almost a decade, also followed and filmed a lady in Missouri, where Three Billboards also takes place, that is believed to probably have inspired the filmmakers. There's a lot of things in real life that is portrayed in the fiction film as well. So right now we're working on that film about a little stubborn, beautiful lady who had her daughter taken, and police didn't do the job, in her opinion. So she also took matters into her own hands, and she actually ended up herself revealing who the killer was. And he ended up getting a conviction again. So that is one of the films that we are right now in the process of finishing. We also did more or less all the needed filming for a documentary about the worst prison riots or some of the worst prison riots in U.S. history, the Lucasville riots, where, as I recall, I believe it was 11 people that were killed. Um, and next month, we're going to Tennessee to set focus on a domestic violence case that unfortunately had a fatal outcome. So that is what we're currently working on, and I'm going back to where it all started, the filmmaking, writing books. So now it's just the other way around. I'm doing the films, and I'm in the process of more or less having finished the script for Face of Hate, the book.
It's so impressive how many projects you've got going on and how much stuff you've I say stuff, but books and movies. I mean, I've done one book and it took me and my brother 2 years to write, especially when you're writing true crime because you're not, this isn't sitting down at your computer and making up a story. You've actually got to do your research and interviews, and it's very time consuming. So it's so impressive with what you're doing.
Thank you very much. But I love what I do, and it's almost like a cliche, but I feel passionate about what I do, and I also think I consider myself to be, I have many labels because I also do produce TV shows, like, celebrity talk shows. We just finished a big celebrity talk show for Paramount, where you have a
Oh, wow.
celebrity host, and then he gets six celebrity guests in on the couch. Typical late night talk show. So I also just finished that in London, UK for Paramount, um, back in October. So I do a lot of things, but I also feel and think that with the way things have been developing over the last couple of decades, there is a need for thorough content, just like you just did in the book that you wrote with your brother. I think that way too often today it's about mad men or mad women quickly getting 10 million followers on YouTube or Instagram, claiming what is the truth and what people should focus on or not. And then way too many people, they're getting their only sources, their only news, their only knowledge from those accounts. That is basically the opinion making of one single person. Instead of as it was just when I started out working on a daily newspaper 25 years ago, where it was researched, it was in depth, it was not only scratching the surface, but with more and more people diving into the easy way of being entertained from social media by influencers, I think it also means that there's a bigger need for old dinosaurs like you and I to actually do the groundwork and actually put those 2 years into the book. And then we can only hope that we do not have 10 million readers like some people too easily have 10 million viewers. But let's say that, if just the 10 right people then read your book or my book, then it is definitely something that is good for society, in my opinion. So though it is extremely hard, both from a time-consuming and personal aspect, there's a great need for it, and the need is bigger than ever.
Yeah, and I completely agree. If you want to be successful in honestly YouTube or social media, it's got to be very quick. You've got to get your story out extremely early. And a lot of people just repeat the same information that's out there, whether it's correct or not. And yeah, with our book, A Murder on Campus, a professor, the cop in North Carolina's most notorious cold case, which is available on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, and anywhere you can buy a book. We had to do things like the search warrants were lost. So, I had to battle Asheville PD and city council for that. The medical examiner's report was lost. We tracked down her roommate and her friends, which had never been interviewed, including her boyfriend, and they were, across the US, and that was very time consuming, but you can't do books or movies with the mindset of my goal is to make as much money as possible. The goal has to be this is first of all, it's a labor of love, right? Like you're going to spend a lot of time and hours and anguish over something that is not going to probably financially produce the outcome that's really, beneficial for that use of time. But there's for us, it was about honoring Virginia and getting her story out there. There's this whole idea that a friend of mine would always tell me of: people die twice, once during their natural death, and then a second time when they're forgotten. And one of our goals was to make sure that she's not forgotten. And so I really appreciate when I see you putting the time and energy into telling these stories that aren't as popular as others where you would get paid right away.
Absolutely, and thank you very much. But my reward with a film as Face of Hate is that we took it to a lot of US networks. And we had, unlike many other that are doing films, we had the ability of opening the doors to the biggest networks and actually have a conversation with them. And it would also even be, media or networks that you would say is normally affiliated with either the right or the left side of politics. Most of them were extremely afraid of touching base on a topic as racism with the current US society, so to speak. And it was regardless if it was left or right media. They didn't, some would want more Trump in it. There's no Trump in it. Some would want more Trump in it. Some others would, turn down the racism, would turn down other things, or pump up this, pump up that, because it was a way of finding a film for them where they were actually not afraid of the reaction from the audience. And if we didn't do it one way or another, they felt that it was not going to get any traction with the viewers because it was, as it is, too much for the US audience to stomach, so to speak. And they were afraid of political reactions. A lot of the things that really, pardon my French, pisses me off as an investigative journalist. When I now see that millions of people have watched it around the world with only just 20,000 comments on YouTube and on that, then it is my reward actually proving that racism and the hardest topics in society is not too much for the audience to stomach. The audience is actually often way more clever and intelligent than we give them credit for. So to me, proving those networks wrong is a huge reward that is, in this case, much more worth than dollars.
Yeah, and I'd compliment you for not making this a political issue, because I think that if you wanted a quick buck, that would be the way to do it, would be to, blame this all on Trump and make this something that would go viral, just attacking another political party. But this isn't. This is you've stayed focused on Jason and his experiences, and this there's several, again, layers to this, whether it is looking at racism or looking at the effect of PTSD on children and the effect of not having a stable family life. There's several, I could go on and on of kind of lenses that you could look this movie through and gain something out of it. So again, I encourage people to make sure they watch it. But um, you're absolutely right that I could see why some networks would view it in that way, of that, they don't want to tackle these issues, and it's not as easy of a sell for them, I guess is the way to put it. Again, thank you for coming on, and thank you for making this movie and for continuing to do what you do. Is there any way that we can get in touch with you, or make sure we're getting notices about what you're doing? I know you're on social media. Can you give us your social media tags and any other way
It,
that we
it
can follow you?
yeah, it's fairly easy because I'm the only person in the world with a name that is spelled Steffenhou. So that is my social media handle, regardless if it's on Instagram, Facebook, etc. And that means that I'm also, fairly easy looking up if people they want to send me a comment, have a question, if they have ideas about what we should look into next. So my name's Steffen Hou, how in American. That is easy finding in this big beautiful digital world.
All right. Well, thank you again for coming on. Make sure that you pick up Faces of Hate. And if you want to support me, you can like and follow Santana True Crime. You can also pick up my book, A Murder on Campus, A Professor, the Cop, in North Carolina's most notorious cold case. I'm going to put links to everything in the description, so feel free just to click on that. Thank you again, and good night.
Thank you.